Jerry Silverman speaking. For those of you who were on the call yesterday, welcome back. For those of you who are just joining for the first time, welcome. And thanks for filling out these polls. Yes, it's great to hear that everybody is either middling or in a totally awesome mood because you're going to see totally awesome software. I do apologize to Jessica for not including How I Met Your Mother on this list. It is one of my favorites too. But it looks like the majority of folks in the room are Breaking Bad fans, so that's very sad that it's over for you not to enjoy it anymore. And it looks like the majority of folks in the room are Illustrator users, so that's great. We're going to show some good stuff in Illustrator, good stuff in Photoshop, and some of the other apps that we're seeing here. So thanks for filling out the polls. I'm going to go ahead and move over to sharing my screen. Oh, that actually reminds me. Wait, let's go back 1 second. If you have problems hearing this via voice over IP, you can actually dial into the conference room. Although, since this is being recorded, I would recommend trying to listen through your computer speakers. So you can dial in if you need to using that number, 855-870-5454. I'll copy that into the chat pod right now. And again, if you need to call in to listen only, then you can do that. Otherwise, let's actually go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat pod as you're familiar. And as you see down at the bottom left hand of your screen, you can download today's slides and yesterday's slides just by clicking on each of those and clicking download file. But those will be up for the duration of the presentation, so not to worry if you don't do it right now. So today is all about digital imaging, graphics, and publication design using Adobe Creative Cloud. Now, there was a question yesterday around, hey, that looks different than the CS6 that I'm using currently, and that is correct. What we're talking about is the Creative Cloud applications, which we went over yesterday, what the difference between Creative Suite and Creative Cloud is, the fact that you can have Creative Cloud deployed locally on your desktop. It's not running in some server in the cloud somewhere. And you can deploy it on a NIPR, SIPR, JWIX classified or secure machine, depending on your license type. So we went over that. For those who were not on the call yesterday, this is what my beautiful face looks like, although I'm a little bit racked by a cough right now, so I'm maybe a little more haggard. If you have any questions on anything you're seeing today, you can feel free to send me an email. I've been at Adobe for 6 years, and again, I'm a technical solutions consultant for the entire Defense Department and intelligence community in the United States. I've got a number of Adobe certifications and also a computer art degree from the School of Visual Arts. So I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. And I do not get a lot of sleep, as Sharon will attest after having spoken with her on many sleepless occasions. So hopefully any of this will make sense. So today's agenda is as follows. We're going to talk about digital imaging with Photoshop, illustration with Illustrator, publications with InDesign, web and mobile with a few different web tools, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And that's really the agenda. Yesterday, again, as I mentioned, we went through a pretty comprehensive overview of what exactly CC is, what the services are, what the storage is like, what the new features across the different tools are, and how you can get it, what you're licensed for, how you can sign up for expert services to have a consultation with an Adobe expert as part of your license. And we did some Q&A and went over some resources as well. So we recorded that session, and you can get that session right here at that URL. And of course, I'm going to share these slides with you. You can get them down at the lower left-hand side of your screen. Just a reminder that I know that many folks, after they see today's webinar, are going to say, I need more detail, or you didn't cover the video tools, or you know, we're not actually getting the depth that we need, and that's why we at Adobe put up this webinar series for the DoD specifically, and it's very comprehensive. It goes through August. It's weekly on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to cover some of the things that we're covering now, but we're going into much more detail than we have time for today. And again, you can get these slides a number of different ways, and just to look at the links. So I saw 8 Photoshop users. If people have signed up in the webinar since then, then you probably come in and you are a Photoshop user by default. And we have added so many new features to Photoshop since June 2013 that it's hard to kind of keep track of them. What you're seeing right here are really the best new features, but they are not the only new features. There are what's called JDI, Just Do It, workflow enhancements inside of Photoshop that we've added to really make it a much more useful and productive tool. So I'm going to go ahead and just launch Photoshop really quick. And since it's 64-bit native and has been for a while, you'll see that it loads up really super duper fast on an SSD-based hard drive. So one of the first new features that I want to talk about actually involves this picture of an Army camp. And you get extra credit if you can identify which Army camp this actually comes from. I don't recognize it. I've been to Army bases all over the place, but I don't recognize this particular camp. It is nice looking and it's out in the woods. But one of the newest features that we added is kind of a tweak on an old feature called Puppet Warp. And as you may recall with Puppet Warp, if I were to grab an object like so and say Edit Puppet Warp, I could drop a bunch of points along this axis, and then I could start bending the image, bending, kind of squishing and pinching it. But this is really hard to use if I want to change the perspective through which I see this object, right? So if I want to adjust the perspective of just part of an image while keeping the rest of the image intact, that's really hard to do with the Puppet Warp tool. So what we did was added a new capability called Perspective Warp, and this is the first new feature that I'm going to talk about. Let's see. Yep, I got mouse posé working. So Perspective Warp basically allows you to do the same thing that Puppet Warp does, but basically create a perspective grid on your photo. So I'm just clicking and dragging with this Perspective Warp tool, and as you'll see, as I get a little bit close, you'll see that we are linking those two planes together. And now what I can do when I'm finished creating these quad shapes, I can actually start warping it. But what I need to do is tell Photoshop what the perspective of this photo is natively. So I can take these little grab handles and make sure that Photoshop understands the native perspective of this photo. And now that I'm finished, I can come up to my control panel up here, and I can click the warp button. And that'll allow me to adjust the pins in this mode to actually warp the image. And so the first thing I want to do is make sure that the image is straight up and down. And so there's a button in the control panel up here that I can automatically straighten near the vertical line. So you'll notice a very subtle shift in the straightness. But now, as I grab each one of these pins and move it around, notice that now I can really impact the perspective. So it can look like I'm taking I took the photo from a little bit higher. If I grab this pin down here, I can really do some interesting effects. Now, if I hold down the Shift key and grab this vertex, so now I can pull this out a little bit more to make it look like I took the photo from a different angle. If I hold down Shift there and move and grab one of these vertices and pull it out. So now it really does look like I took the photo from a different angle while keeping the rest of the photo's perspective intact. So I'll straighten that one out as well. Now these are all straight up and down. Let me go ahead and move that even a little bit more. If I wanted to come over here and make the perspective even further back. So this is really much different perspective than I had before. I can go ahead and commit, and now we can look at what the difference was before and after, just if I come in like that. Of course, this can also be applied as a smart filter on a smart object. As you'll see over here in this is kind of the finish, this can be applied as a smart filter. So somebody with much more expertise changed the perspective on that picture. So again, we've long had the ability to rotate and scale and distort image content, but actually being able to change the perspective using Perspective Warp is going to save us a lot of time, not just in images like that, but let's say we've got a composited image, right? Let's see. Oh, hi there. Hi, Nargis. So let's say we've composited this train onto this background, again, at this Army base, right? So there's our train layer right there. Now, if I were to grab that train layer and say Puppet Warp and drag a bunch of, spikes along there, notice that, yeah, I can kind of get it down to how I want, but notice that it twists and turns, and I'd have to put a bunch of constraints, and it's really kind of wonky. But if I take that same object and I use perspective warp, and I just very easily drag a grid over it, right? Just like with Portlandia, put a bird on it or drag a grid over it. So let's, yeah, I don't watch as much TV as it might seem. So now I'm going to go ahead and show Photoshop what the actual perspective should be, and I'll go ahead and warp that. So I can pull the train down into perspective very nicely. If I hold down Shift and straighten that out, now I can pull that even further out along the path, right? So let's just hold down Shift and undo that, and now I can even attenuate it even further. Right? Pretty nice. And again, that was on a smart object, so I can see the before and after really easily. So that's perspective warp, one of the new features that just shipped in January in Photoshop CC. A huge time saver if you need to make those types of perspective adjustments. Now, a productivity feature inside of Photoshop that end users of Photoshop have been asking for years, especially those who use Illustrator or InDesign, have said, we use smart objects all the time in Photoshop, but how can we have linked smart objects? So in other words, instead of always embedding an Illustrator file or an EPS file or some other type of file as a smart object, wouldn't it be great if we could actually have a linked smart object, excuse me, so that if we're working in a collaborative environment, somebody is responsible for that graphic can make an adjustment and it'll update inside of all of our Photoshop files. So just to take a look really quick at this here logo, right, I'm just going to grab the Adventure Co logo and look in the Layers panel over here. Let me zoom in. Hopefully you can see this easily via Connect. So this Adventure Co logo is actually a linked smart object, and it's linked because you see that nice little linked image there. Now, one of the things that we added in CS6 was the capability of sorting through your Layers panel to find different types of objects. So you can search very easily. So I'm going to look for all the smart objects in my in my document. Let me see, right? So I'm going to look for only the linked smart objects. So there's the linked smart objects. I'm going to look for the embedded smart objects. So you can do basically both, have linked or embedded. If there are any with missing or erroneous linkages, then you can find those as well. So let's take a look. What does this mean that it's a linked smart object? Well, if I go ahead and edit this, right, so if I double-click the smart object to edit it, it's going to open that smart object up in Illustrator, and you'll see that it's an AI file. Now, this is actually an AI file that's not embedded. It's actually over here in the links panel. Or in the links folder, rather. So that's the actual AI file that I'm going to change. And so if I do something, really basic, like just change the color of the logo and save that and come back over to Photoshop, right? That's what smart objects are for. But we have also changed the actual linked object itself, right? So this is something that is going to assist in the collaborative process when you're designing. And if you wanted to place a smart object, you could just go in and say either place embedded or place linked, right? So if I place a linked, smart object file up here in Photoshop, let's just place that guy right there. It's a little bit uglier, and you get the options to, crop to whatever bounding box that you want, right? Drop it in there, press enter. And as you can see, that is a linked smart object. Now, of course, I can go in and say embed that, and so now it's an embedded smart object instead. But very cool, very useful productivity feature that we've now added into Photoshop CC. Now, the third one is a little more esoteric. Okay, so Nargis is asking me a question in the chat. Utilize the the perspective warp. You have to turn the layer into a smart object. No, Nargis, that is not true. You do not have to turn the object into a smart object to use it. You can use it on basically anything. I was showing it in a non-destructive workflow, but you definitely do not have to use it in that fashion. So I'm just moving my Connect room over here so I can keep an eye on the chat. So this one's a little bit more esoteric, and it's kind of taking a peek into the future. This is the capability that we've put into Photoshop CC for printing out 3D models. Now, Photoshop has had the capability for a long time of importing 3D models like the one that you see here, right? This is a beautiful rocket made by a French artist, and you can see that it's got certain dimensions that we've added to it. You know, it's 116 centimeters across by 95 centimeters deep. Excuse me, and you've always been able in Photoshop to import OBJ or KMZ or Collada files that might be coming from Maya or Google Earth or any of those other types of places, and select certain meshes and add materials to them. So, you know, for the example that I would use here, you know, let's say I wanted to grab this rocket and change the mesh or the diffuse quality. You know, maybe replace the texture with the hull texture with, let's see, 3D printing. Let's give it a water texture. Why not? Sure, that's relevant for space, right? We're looking for planets out there that have water. So there we go. This is our brand new water rocket. So now that I've grabbed the scene, I can rotate around. And if I grab that now, I can do all kinds of different things with the, you know, with that particular texture, right? I can give it more of a bump characteristic, so the contours of the texture will actually be seen as part of the 3D surface, right? So if I really go in and change and increase the bump and then zoom in, you'll see that the surface of the rocket has become extremely bumpy with the waves of the water. So I'm going to go back and just you know, kind of revert to the very beginning, because one of the things that we've added in CC with all of the visualization capabilities and you know, texturing and lighting capabilities is this little widget right up here, which is 3D print settings. So if I wanted to take this object and put it out either to shapeways.com, which is a 3D printing service that you can get out on the internet, or if I had a local 3D printer like the MakerBot Replicator or the Z-Corp Full Color or any of these other ones, I could print directly to these particular printers, 3D printers. Now, one of the issues that you get in 3D printing is that sometimes the model that you've created is bigger than the volume that the printer can handle. And so what you see here with this model, remember, it's 116 centimeters, but the printer volume is only 22 centimeters. So it's about 5 times bigger. Right, you see down here the printer volume is that, and the rocket is about 5 times as big as the printer volume. So what you can do is actually scale to the print volume, right? You can click this button and watch what happens. We've actually made the rocket fit inside of the print volume so that when you actually go and print it, it will, you know, it'll fit. So let's just take a look really quickly at what it looks like when this object prints. We can preview that right here in Adobe Bridge, if Bridge ever lets me bring up the video. Okay. Well, you can't fault me for lack of trying, right? There we go. So over on the right-hand side, hopefully you can see this via Connect. This is a video of the MakerBot 2 printing out the actual model that we have, this rocket model. And this is a time-lapse photo. You can tell that this process actually takes up to you know, 3 hours for this particular object. And how do we know that it takes 3 hours? Well, if I were to go ahead and click print, what Photoshop is going to do is take all of the stress away from me, because when you're printing 3D objects, sometimes your meshes are not watertight, right? A mesh is a 3D surface, for those who are not familiar. And if it's not watertight, then your 3D object will, you know, could get moisture inside of it, which is never a good thing. Also, the thickness of the surfaces and the walls of your object, you may not have modeled them with a thickness that an actual physical object will support. So Photoshop is going in, and when it says unifying scene, what it's doing is making sure that all of the meshes are connected together, and then it will go through and do a thickness pass and make sure that based on that printer that the thickness of each mesh will support the physicality. And it'll also go through, while you're printing a 3D object like this, if you don't create a scaffold to hold it up as it's printing, then it'll start printing in the machine and then fall over because nothing is supporting it. So what you need to print is actually a scaffold and a little raft for the 3D object to sit on. So right now, Photoshop is generating all of that material. And again, this is a 5-centimeter model. So if you're working on something really huge, your average commercial 3D printer is not going to print something enormous. But this could be really good for marketing purposes. If you're designing something in Photoshop and you want to hand out a tchotchke at a trade show or a convention, or you want to give somebody a sample of some of the stuff that you're working on, this is 3D printing is basically the next wave for getting your marketing out there. Just taking a sip of my coffee as we keep generating these UVs. And so basically what you'll get is a preview of what it's going to look like with the scaffolding and the raft. And you get so there we go, repairing the meshes. And once we get that preview, we'll be able to see how long Photoshop estimates that the MakerBot is going to take to print. And also, if you go to Shapeways or some of the other 3D printing services, they will actually allow you to choose what materials you want to print to. So if you want it to be a plastic or something with more of a chrome finish or something with a more matte finish, you can do that as well. And that's usually on the services, not on the MakerBot or something like that. And I should have put the detail level to low, and that's what I think is taking so long. So, I think we're going to move on because we've got a lot to cover. But are there any questions so far on the 3 cool Photoshop features? Right? There's the scaffolding. There we go. All right. So now you can see that we have our 3D print with that great scaffolding that is called out. So that is going to print first and hold up the rocket as it prints. And then this plate down here is called the raft. So that's actually going to stop the rocket from, it's going to stabilize it even more. And notice that we have an estimated time for print, a print size, what printer we're going to. So it's really very useful if you're printing that type of material and collateral. And it takes, again, the kind of expertise necessary for making your 3D meshes and models scalable for print. So very cool new capabilities. We're going to come back and see the generator capability and some of the other capabilities in Photoshop in just a second. But let's move on to Illustrator, because I saw that most of the people in this on this webinar are Illustrator users. So we have done a lot in Illustrator since June 2013. You may have seen demonstrations of the touch type tool or free transform or images and brushes or CSS extraction. But we've added, since January, we've added these 5 huge features and a bunch of other smaller features into Illustrator, which quite frankly have changed the game, at least for me. And I'd have a certification in Illustrator, but nothing has kind of has made Illustrator less daunting for me over the years. You get in and it's the problem of every artist, right? The white page is always scary. Where do I start? And so some of the tools that we have now in Illustrator are going to help you kind of get over that hump. So the first one has to do with the capability of Illustrator to change corners. This is called the live corner capability. So what you're seeing here is the same vector path 3 different ways, but it all originated with this one vector path, this mountain vector path that we have here, right? So if I go through and I use my direct selection tool and I just grab one anchor point on this direct selection tool, you'll notice that I have a new UI affordance, right? That's what they're called, an affordance. And notice that it shows me a little curve next to the direct selection tool and a little button that I can click. And what happens when I click and drag that button is I can curve out that corner live. And notice when it's showing me the radius. I get a heads-up display with the radius. And when I can't bend that corner anymore and make that curved path, I get a nice red indicator, right? So that's really useful. If I double-click on that affordance, or on that little live corner button, I can choose what kind of corner I want it to be. Do I want it to be an inverted round button? Now, of course, I haven't done anything to it, so if I bring the radius up, you'll see, there we go. Do I want an inverted round corner? Do I want a round corner? Do I want a chamfered corner, which is a nice technical design term? And do I want the rounding to be relative or absolute? So you see the difference here just a little bit. So that's really, a nice little affordance around your corners. Now what happens when I just take the direct selection tool and I grab the entire object. So now all of the anchor points on my path are selected. And now if I drag one of those affordances, all of the anchor paths change simultaneously, right? Pretty nice. And I can also, so that's one place, by double-clicking, that's one place that I can change the radii. But I can also get that up in the control panel. So I'll click Cancel, and I can get that up here as well. Now, one nice thing, if I kind of zoom out, and let's say I just wanted to grab these corners of each of these and just round those corners, so I can just do a select with the direct selection tool, and notice that I'm only getting those 6 anchor points, and so I can bend those all up as well, right? Pretty nice, great productivity enhancement, and it makes me just that much less intimidated when I'm working with Illustrator. Here's another one that makes me less intimidated, right? You'll notice this ship here. We Illustrator users are very fond of the pen tool, right? The pen tool has been pretty much the go-to vector art tool since the beginning of Illustrator. And when you look at a boat like this, you'll say, oh, that boat looks like somebody created a bunch of paths and used Bezier handles to get those curves really nice and straight. And what if I told you that the pen tool was not used at all in the creation of this? Rather, wait for it, and that's for Jessica, who is the How I Met Your Mother fan. Lies! No, it's the truth, Jackie. The pencil tool is what was used to get this. It's true. So I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm going to show you how the pencil tool is used to make this. All right, so check out this. If I wanted to imitate this sail, I'm going to go ahead and grab Senior Pencil Tool. And actually, I'm going to double-click on the pencil tool to show you something that is new with it. So we now have this slider in the pencil tool options around fidelity. So it used to be with the pencil tool that your fidelity was always super accurate, right? So if I wanted to imitate the curve of that sail, one second, I would do it in an extremely accurate way with the pencil tool, right? I'm using my good old mouse, and notice that I've now got 4 anchors on that path. It's not too bad. It is smoothed out somewhat, but if I come back into the pencil tool now and double-click it and I smooth that out completely, watch how when I drag my mouse, right, 2 anchor points, and it looks really smooth and really fluid, right? And now if I wanted to come in with the direct select tool and grab the anchor points and use the Bezier handles, I could. But again, this is just a way of using the pencil tool, which is a little less intimidating. So now check this out. Look at what the pencil tool is doing right now. This is something that it never could really do before. It notices when I'm next to an anchor, and it allows me to connect those anchors, right? So I'll go ahead and make that. No, that wasn't quite good enough. Let's go ahead and just bend that out, right? Very nice. And now if I'm going to connect these 2 paths together, notice that it recognizes that I am connecting those paths. Pretty sweet, right? This is all pencil magic using that using the smooth option with the new and improved pencil tool, right? Getting lots of OMGs and other, yay, pretty good for a pencil, thank you. I invented this myself, so just so that you're aware. Now let's go over and take a look at another example of what we can do with the pencil tool. Let's say I wanted to make an object like this. How would you go about doing that? Well, why the pen tool, of course? No, you can do it with the pencil tool as well. If I hold down the Shift key and I start drawing, watch. It draws by 45-degree angles. So I can go like so. And then I can come over and hold down Shift, and again, like so. I can come over, hold down Shift, and get that 45-degree angle, like so. And now, the pièce de résistance. All right, I got one anchor point in there. All right, big whoop. I didn't have to. But pretty sweet being able to duplicate, complex and even these straight edge images or paths with the pencil tool. So that's great, but what we also need is a way to adjust what we've done, the beautiful work that we've done with the pencil tool. And so if you look at this boat, you might say to yourself, the wind looks like it's kind of blowing, and I need this sail to kind of billow a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is come on over to the handy-dandy, nope, not that one, anchor point tool. Now, you'll notice a new affordance when you use the anchor point tool around any curve that you come across or any path. Notice that it's showing me that I've got a nice little curve that I can modify. So watch this, guys. All right, not even selected. I click and I drag, and I can modify that curve, right? I don't have to use my Bezier handles if I don't want to. I can just go through and say, yeah, right? And that looks like it's, right, Nargis is like, what? So pretty darn cool. If I come down here, for example, and I grab my anchor point tool, and I want to make that a little bit, bubbled up there, bubble that guy up, bubble that guy up. And, the truth is we can do this uniformly. If I hold down the Shift key, I can actually notice how the handles are going straight up and down, right? If I let go of the Shift key, it's a little bit more free form and stuff like that, but I can't go to the left and right if I'm holding down Shift. Pretty sweet, pretty fun. Thank you, Laura. I am running for president in 2016. I'll let you know how my prospects are looking. So let's go back and see some other cool things, right? Now, if you've been a follower of Illustrator since the CS5 version, you might recognize this kind of cool demo of the perspective grid. Now, the perspective grid is something, if I just create a new file in Illustrator and I come in and view and I say perspective grid, and let's just grab a 2-point grid. This is something, like I said, we've had since CS5. If I come in and just change which plane that I'd like to draw on, and then I just grab a rectangle, I'll make it a gaudy, ugly, disgusting pink, and I'll just draw in perspective. I don't know if you knew that you could do this in Illustrator. Again, we've been able to do it for some time. And then if I come and grab my perspective selection tool, and I drag that anchor up, and now I can change and draw on the other surface as well. Right, so I'm drawing in perspective along a perspective grid. So one of the things when I would do this demo back in 2010 and 2011 was that's cool and everything, but what if I want to change the perspective? Will the art change with it? And the answer was always no. And that's a pretty disappointing answer, to be perfectly honest with you. So now in CC, when you go into perspective grid, you can say lock the station point. And what you get is when you grab the perspective grid tool, now you can start moving the art up and down using the perspective grid to be able to change what your perspective is. And that comes in real handy when you're looking at art like this that might have some hidden art back behind it. So I can actually shift the perspective of this art, and it takes a second because it's a very complex drawing here. And let's say I just want to grab this and see what that text is on the wall. So I can move it over. I can see that there's some text there on the wall. Looks like it says welcome. And if I come out over here, let me zoom out a little bit. Excuse me. Still trying to zoom. There we go. So now I can actually move this up and look into that courtyard so that I'll be able to see both the words and also any art that might be on layers beneath. So very cool capabilities now with art that you're creating using perspective grid inside of Illustrator CC. Now, the last one that I wanted to show you has to do with SVG output, right? So this is something in the world of the web that you need to know how to do because let's go and look at a website. So right here we see our wonderful ship that is sailing, and this is an SVG file. I'm sure we'd be able to view the source and see that that's an SVG file. But wouldn't it be great if it scaled all the way across the page, and when I scaled this website that the graphic actually scaled along with it? So that's not something that Illustrator exported in the past, but now we actually have the capability of exporting a graphic as an SVG file so that it will responsively scale when it's dropped in, so that CSS can influence its scaling when it's dropped into a web page. So if I say File Save As, and I go in, instead of an Illustrator file, I save it as an SVG file, and let's call it responsive, and we can just put that right on my desktop there. Right down here, you can see that we can allow this to be responsive. So the SVG will be resizable by CSS in the web page that you drop it into. So we'll go ahead and, actually, we already have it saved. So if I go into Edge Code, which is the code through which, this is a code editor that is very lightweight. We're going to talk about it in just a little while. If I go into this page and I look for where that SVG file, that the current SVG file is, right? This is the one, and notice that Edge Code shows you, gives you a little preview of what that, what that file looks like. So if I go back into Bridge and I look for the responsive SVG file, and I notice that it's called, sail whale banner _ responsive, and it was saved the same way. If I just go in and paste that, let's see, it should recognize it, and then I save it, I come back to Chrome, and I refresh. Now you'll see that that SVG file will scale, the CSS will allow it to scale along with the web page size. So that is, again, a really great productivity tool that if you know that your illustration is going out to the web, save it as an SVG file, which is very lightweight, and it's all based on vector code, and you're not going to have those pixelation problems that you have when you're saving for the web with other file formats. So, excuse me, that's Illustrator in a little nutshell, in a 10-minute nutshell. Of course, there are many new features that we want to talk about, but we have to get to InDesign. Now, I saw a bunch of InDesign users, in the chat pod there in the polls, and so I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to talk about what's new in the world of InDesign. Now, we talked yesterday about the digital publishing suite and what the capabilities are for using the Folio Overlays panel and the Folio Builder panel to add rich interactivity and then publish it out to an iPad or another device. But if you're on a classified network, you might not be able to reach out to the digital publishing suite, and you might not also be able to distribute folios coming from the digital publishing suite. And one of the hot areas in the world of publishing, specifically book publishing, but we've seen Army actually using this file format for quite some time, is EPUB. And EPUB is basically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all rolled up into a zipped file that can be viewed on a number of different devices. So right now, I'm using Reflector to show you what this InDesign file looks like on my iPad, right? So I've got a title page, and I'm just looking at this on the iBooks, the iBooks application. You'll notice that it maintains a lot of the great styling that you would expect from InDesign, but it's reflowable, right? So if I change the orientation of my device, you see that we go from a 2-page layout to a 1-page layout, and right, we get a more vertical orientation, whereas if I now change that, we get a horizontal orientation and a 2-page spread. We also have conventions like, for example, this, how do I zoom this up? Like this interactive table of contents that when I tap it, it takes me to specific spots in the, to a bookmarked location inside of the EPUB. And it also has this really cool feature of being able to tap and see a footnote, right? So this is newly supported in the EPUB 3 specification. JavaScript, HTML, and all of those capabilities for great typography and fidelity to the layout is new in EPUB 3 So in InDesign, if you're not familiar with EPUB, you might want to get familiar with something called the Articles panel. And what the Articles panel allows you to do is include or uninclude aspects of your InDesign layout into the EPUB that eventually gets exported. So we didn't see this two-page spread in our EPUB because it's not included in the Articles panel. So what you do is you just drag and drop all the elements that you want to be in your EPUB in the order that you'd like them in your EPUB into the Articles panel, right? So for example, this table of contents, let's see. So if I double-click inside of the Articles panel, it's right there between the line and this first group, which is this object right there. So if I want to just get rid of this or remove it from the flow, so I don't want the table of contents in my EPUB, I can just get rid of it from the Articles panel, and it won't show up in my EPUB document. But if I do want it in, then all I have to do is just grab it and put it where I want it to be, and there it is. So you may have also noticed that there was some interesting placement of some of the objects. So if we look down on this page, in the InDesign file, you'll notice that we have this floating image which is beneath inside of column 1. But if we go back and look at the EPUB on the iPad, where is that image? That image is actually anchored to the bottom of paragraph 1, and as we reflow the text, we actually see that yes, it is actually anchored to the end of that paragraph that says PAX, right? So how did it get anchored in there? Well, as you can see, when I grab that image, you see that it's actually anchored right there. It's got a little, anchor symbol, and so when you export this to EPUB, that anchoring is going to be respected, and you can go into, excuse me, your anchored object options, and you can set up a bunch of different reference points, right? So the reference point for this is going to be the top left-hand corner, and you can set how it's going to sit relative to your text, right? And you can prevent manual positioning. You can do all kinds of great stuff. You can situate it relative to the spine of the EPUB, and all kinds of things. But in order to create that anchoring, right, I can just actually go in and say anchored object and release that anchor. So if I wanted to anchor that myself, all I would have to do, what happened to the text? Where did it go? Hey, my text disappeared. So let's say I wanted to anchor it to the breakers. All I'd have to do is drag this nice little blue guy up to where the breakers are, right? And so now you see that it is anchored to the end of that paragraph, right? Pretty cool and easy. One other thing, and you'll also notice this, now where is that footnote, right? This footnote right here, if I just get rid of that footnote and come into type, insert footnote right there, and then I can type in, this is a cool footnote. So when I go to export this as an EPUB, right, I want to style that as no indent. If I come in and export this to my EPUB, if I say File, Export, EPUB, put that on my desktop, so I will see a number of different options. So first of all, we want to pay attention to content order, because content order, we want it to be the same as we laid out in the Articles panel. We want to make sure that footnote placement is inside one of those pop-ups. And we also want to make sure that the navigation actually follows the paragraph styles that we have set up for our table of contents, so that we can actually have a navigation that goes along with our TOC style. And what do I mean by TOC style? When I come back a little bit and take a look at where that TOC is, right? Let's find it right there. Oops. Let me make sure to grab the appropriate tool. So there's my TOC. When I look at the text, you'll notice that we have a TOC entry paragraph style associated with it. And that TOC entry paragraph style is going to alert us that this is going to impact the navigation. So in other words, when I come up here and I look at my navigation, right, this is the TOC that iBooks gives me, right? And it's the same TOC that I set up with that styling. And I don't have any local bookmarks, But the way that I engineer this to jump around is by setting up bookmarks to those particular pages, and then they will jump when I tap them on the iPad, right? So let's come back over here. Let's resume our viewing. Come back over and notice when I tap that, it goes straight to the bookmark. So again, EPUBs are getting much more robust, and the last example that I want to show is the capability inside of EPUB to place Edge Animate files, and this is how we're going to go over to the web. So Edge Animate, if you are not familiar already, let me show you. Edge Animate is basically an animation tool, and I have Muse blocked out here because we're not going to be talking about it today. But Edge Animate is an animation tool. You can take animations using Edge Animate and embed them directly into your InDesign file. So let me show you how that's going to look. So the object that we want to embed directly into our InDesign file in our EPUB looks like this, and it's a very simple weather tool that has 3 little tabs that you tap on, and each one of these buttons has a little script, an action. It's actually not action script like in Flash, but it is JavaScript that says, you know, when somebody has touched or clicked on this particular button, we want to go to 2 seconds in the timeline. And each one of the other buttons has that. So if we scroll throughout the timeline, we can see that there is a bunch of animation. We can see that there is, you know, differences in the appearance. And so when we publish this, when I say go to the publish settings, you can see that we've got a bunch of options. We can publish this out to the web, we can publish it directly out to iBooks, or we can create an animate deployment package called an OAM package. We can set a poster frame for it, and we can target where we want to save that out to. And then that OAM file is basically just encapsulated, it's encapsulated HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So here's what that animate package looks like. It's an OAM file. And if I wanted to place that directly in my InDesign composition, so actually it is already placed, but we need to relink it or update the link. Let's just put that in right there. And you'll notice since we added a poster image for that OAM file, the poster image will pop up. And so if I go in iBooks and I look at what that animation looks like, you'll see that it actually works, right? So this is iBooks on the desktop. It also works on the tablet. But so that is the interactive functionality that you can have, JavaScript-based and CSS-based functionality that you can drop into an EPUB document. So it's very cool that EPUB has come so far. Now, when you export your EPUBs, you want to make sure that you're going out to EPUB 3. And there are not a ton of e-readers that support EPUB 3 at this time, but the EPUB 3 specification supports audio, video, JavaScript, and also Japanese vertical text, and also right to left text for characters like Hebrew characters and stuff. And so these new features are not going to work on e-readers that only support EPUB 2.0.1. So welcome back to the browser wars. We hope you've missed them. So just keeping on going with web tools, since we are running short on time, I know we've covered a ton of features. I wanted to make you guys aware of this really great resource that we have. If I can just get PowerPoint to do what I want. We have this great resource at html.adobe.com that helps you decide which tool is right for the right job. Because depending on what you want to do, we have so many different HTML editing tools, responsive design tools, prototyping and wireframing tools, coding tools, previewing tools. We really have a lot of them, and they're meant for very specific tasks. Dreamweaver is really kind of the all-in-one Swiss Army knife. Edge Reflow is there specifically for responsive design, and I'm going to show you a really cool capability in Edge Reflow in just a sec. And Fireworks has been there forever as a graphics tool for the web. Edge Animate, which we saw just a minute ago, does really cool animations. And so this tool on the html.adobe.com website will allow you to kind of check in, what am I doing, and then see which is the most appropriate tool. We also have a ton of example files that you can go in and download and start learning how to use Edge. So if you want to, for example, go in to Edge Animate, and let's just close this up, and you want to learn how to start making a cool project. So here is, let me see. Yep, I think this is it. So this is a really very highly interactive, very highly animated project, which if we just go ahead and preview it in the browser right here, you'll notice it has a splash screen. It's got some great animations. It's got stuff coming in. If you scroll, it's got parallax scrolling effects, and it's got some interactivity. So yes, I want to create cool animations, so I want to use Edge Animate. If I keep scrolling down. So the source code for this project is available right there on html.adobe.com/webtools. So if you go in there and you find there's a bunch of different samples for downloading those samples. And this example kind of shows you what Edge Reflow is. I'm going to show you a little bit differently what Edge Reflow is if you haven't already seen it before, but it's a tool for making responsively laid out websites, which is a huge concern for everybody who's working on the web these days, right? If you have a layout that looks like this, that's not good enough because you need to know what that's going to look like on a tablet and a smartphone. So with Edge Reflow and these media queries that you see up here, it's very easy to take a layout with imagery, with text, with graphics, and create a bunch of mock-ups or wireframes of what that website is supposed to look like when it scales down to a 420 pixel width or a 714 pixel width, right? This is what it might look like on a tablet. Notice there's no menu up there. But if we come up to the 980 width, which is probably a horizontal browser, or horizontal tablet or a standard web browser, then you've got a menu over to the left, which is a little bit more clickable and less tappable. So what I wanted to show you in the interaction between Reflow and Photoshop has really kind of taken the user interface world by storm. So what you're going to see here is a design, right? We've seen this design before that was created in Photoshop, and doing all of that painstaking slicing and dicing and importing into Edge Reflow just to come over here and do all of this relaying out of all the content, that seems very labor intensive, as you can imagine, right? I'd have to go through, grab the slice. Where the heck is the slice tool? I haven't used it in so long. Grab the slice tool, right? Slice around all the stuff. So we don't want to have to do that. And one way that you can take this layout and get it out very quickly to Edge Reflow, which I'm going to quit, is you can say File, Generate Edge Reflow Project. So, yep, hold on to your hats over here. I'm going to go back over to Bridge, and in just a second, you'll see a folder pop up with the Edge Reflow project and all of the assets being generated from that Edge Reflow project. So hopefully you can see that right there, right? We've got a bunch of assets and an Edge Reflow project ready to go. And all of those assets are based on how we named our layers, right? So you might think that naming layers is not important, but naming layers is super important if you want to use this type of workflow, because you can name your layers according to how you'd like them compressed, like .png or .jpg, or even you can specify what type of compression you give it. So .jpeg10. If you call this folder .jpeg10, it's going to save all the contents of that folder as a JPEG with 10 out of 12 compression. You can also take this hero image and save it as a PNG at 200% size. And also as a JPEG 5. So naming your files when you generate a reflow project, or if you don't want to generate a reflow project, you can come in and just make image assets and it'll spit out a folder of all the assets in your layers panel. Super amazing and time saving. But let's take a look at what that reflow project actually looks like that got spit out from Photoshop. So it takes a while to load in, but as it loads in, you can see over on the right-hand side in Edge Reflow that this document is actually going to be linked directly to my Photoshop file. So look at that. This came directly out of Photoshop and into Edge Reflow, and it looks pretty identical to what we got out of Photoshop. That's going to save you so much time in creating your responsive web mockups. But it gets even better because you can link this Edge Reflow file directly to the Photoshop file that it came from just by clicking Photoshop Assets Sync. So if I come back over here and I grab this logo, I grab this logo here, and let's say I just, well, maybe I'll add a color overlay there. Yeah, that looks pretty awful, right? If I come back over to Reflow, well, what should happen? Let me see. Well, it doesn't seem to be happening. Why is it not happening? All right, we're going to turn those effects off. We're going to save it back out. So what should be happening is I should see that there's a difference over here. For some reason, it's not working right now, but you get the idea that you sync your Photoshop file over. I don't know why it's not, I think this is one of the things that just got fixed. As you can see, there is a new update to Photoshop wherein this bug that I'm experiencing actually got fixed. So as you can see, being part of the Creative Cloud subscription, you are entitled to new updates. This update actually just shipped this morning, but never update your software right before a demo. At least that's what I've found. So that's really what I wanted to leave you with. If you're doing a lot of user interface, user experience work in Photoshop and you want to get that content out into a project like this or into an application like Edge Reflow so you can start visualizing how to change it from phone to tablet to desktop, you can do that. So I am just going to reiterate some of the resources that I brought up last time, which is, right, this is a great webinar. You're learning a bunch of new tips and tricks, and we've got an entire series ready to go for you that's going to be every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, starting this Thursday, actually. You might want to skip the first one because you've already seen it before, but if not, it might be a good review or refresher. And we're going to do the same session on Thursday, March 6th, but then we go out and we're doing a whole lot more. We're doing 1 hour deep dives into Photoshop, 1 hour deep dives into Illustrator, an hour deep dives into InDesign, and really getting more intimate with those programs. So I wanted to encourage you to attend those, but also I want to encourage you to take advantage of what you are entitled to vis-a-vis consulting services from Adobe. And if you need to have a one-on-one or small group session with a detailed product expert around a specific project, depending on what license you have, you can actually sign up for that. You can email expert-service@adobe.com. Tell them you're a Creative Cloud for Enterprise licensee. You might have to get the license number from Sharon or the customer number, and you can start setting up your sessions. And these are 30-minute sessions, right? You can actually add them on or compile them to make it like a 60-minute session or something like that. And if you're a little bit shy and you want to keep learning on your own, there's also this great learning portal, which is available at helpx.adobe.com, where you can get even more into all of these great new features. Now, to get you this actual slide deck, again, down on the lower left-hand side of your screen, you should be able to click each one of those and download them. But I'm going to go ahead and pull up. So let's see. I'm going to see if there are any questions in the chat pod currently. And I'm going to go ahead and move over to our outro interface.